have you join us tonight for a virtual conservation expedition with San Francisco Botanical Gardens curator Ryan Guillou. This presentation highlights the importance of partnerships in addressing conservation challenges, celebrates the biodiversity and beauty of the region, and introduces us to some special species that may make their way into a garden bed in the future. Please use the Q&A feature to contribute questions throughout Ryan's presentation, and we'll definitely reserve time at the end to answer them. And with that, Ryan, I have my passport and I am ready to go. I desperately need a vacation on this virtual trip to Kenya with you and Botanic Gardens Conservation International. Take it away.
Thank you so much for that, Jessa, and great to see everybody. I'm going to get my PowerPoint up and we'll get started. Alrighty, so yes, thank you again, Jessa, for the very, very kind introduction. And yeah, we're going to do a little bit of exploring today. So I had the great fortune this past November, feels like ages ago considering what this past year has been like, to go to Kenya for about 2.5 weeks to participate with an effort with Botanic Gardens Conservation International. But before I really get into that, I really want to kind of talk about the San Francisco Botanical Garden a bit. And you know, many of you are probably familiar with us, many of you probably come to us quite often, but just as a quick reminder, you know, we are 55 acres in Golden Gate Park. We are probably the most diverse part of San Francisco with thousands of different kinds of plants from all over the world, many being rare, endangered, and you know, we really are a haven for the people of San Francisco and the neighboring area. And it is such a wonderful, beautiful space, and we have a fantastic climate to grow so many amazing, amazing different kinds of plants. And so I want to talk a little bit today about, you know, briefly about the role of botanical gardens and how much it's changed over the hundreds of years they've started to be around. You know, originally botanical gardens, what we call botanical gardens now, started off as you know, areas for spaces for medicinal plants, areas for worship, and also eventually became kind of exclusive to the elite with their large estates. And then over time, you know, people started to realize they could hold a lot of different kinds of plants and started being a place to study plants. But now over time, they've really actually started to take on a different role and much more conservation focus and much more in a way to engage the public and people. So, you know, botanical gardens are a great way to connect people with plants, especially in a time like now with the fires and the air quality being so poor. And you know, they're a great place for physical and mental and social well-being, a place to escape and get away from it all and learn. So it's a really, botanical gardens play such a vital role, and instead of being just a beautiful space as they once were, now they play a much bigger role in conservation, protecting the world's species. And it's something, it's a very large problem in the world these days, is that we are losing species at an alarming rate. And botanical gardens, through ex situ conservation efforts, are a place that we can store species as a repository so they don't go extinct forever. And so one thing that we're looking at doing here at the San Francisco Botanical Garden is really looking at our collection from a much larger global perspective. So ignoring a day like today, we normally have a very cool, foggy, mild climate. And so instead of growing just anything that we can grow, we're looking at focusing on specific plants from specific parts of the world that actually require our cool, foggy conditions. Excuse me, a bit of a hoarse throat. And really, you know, capitalizing on what we have grown already, what we've grown successfully. And over the 80 years that we've been in existence, we've learned a lot about what we can grow that no one else can grow, and also look at why we should how we should best utilize our space and our resources and our efforts to play a much more pivotal role in global plant conservation. And so part of that is looking at parts of the world where we would want to get our plants from. And so what you can see here is a map we've generated this past year, for past couple of years, really trying to find, really identifying parts of the world that have climates most specific to ours. So using different data in terms of using elevation and rainfall and temperature variations, we're really starting to see where our collection should come from. And if you look at the continent of Africa, you can see there's a certain parts of Eastern Africa that fall within Kenya, right on the equator, that have cloud forest climates, or one of our core climatic collections exists there. And so one of the ways that we would never be able to achieve all these, we would never be able to achieve bringing in all these different species and conserving them without partners with others. You know, as much as I would love to travel all over the world and to all of those different wonderful colored spaces on the map, that's just not doable. And so botanical gardens really require and really need to have partnerships with other institutions, universities, other botanical gardens from all over the world, to help build our collections and share material between institutions, so that we can have a much more robust understanding of what we grow, why we grow it, how can we conserve it, how can we make sure we put these plants in the right spaces, how can we make sure this different genetic material can go back to the wild if it's been eliminated from its original space. So, you know, partnerships are such a crucial role in conservation as a whole, but especially in plant conservation, because we're trying to protect things from all over the place. And so, you know, one of the fantastic groups that we work with is Botanic Gardens Conservation International, also known as BGCI. And this is the largest network of botanical gardens in the world, with over 600 member gardens and other botanical related institutions. This group has played a massive role in helping connect botanical gardens. And it's a really great way for developing gardens to connect with established gardens and share resources. And so they help with a whole range of activities, from plant conservation, capacity building, trainings, accreditation, and they even assist with funding, which is really, really great for gardens who are trying to, you know, get on their feet and really start pursuing some great programs and some great efforts. And so, really fantastic group, and they've been around for quite a while now. And yeah, it's just been a fantastic organization to work with, and we've been able to create partnerships with other gardens and other institutions through their efforts. And so I'm very fortunate to have some great connections there and have our garden be a part of their network as well. So quick map you can see here, this is where all 600 gardens, actually it's 625 gardens to be specific, all over the world, showing BGCI's reach and the potential for partnerships and where they may be. So it's really, really quite exciting and quite motivating, and especially during these difficult times. So some of you may be wondering, so why Kenya of all places? And you know, you can see from that, hope you can see from that map I shared earlier, that that there are montane regions in Kenya, and there's some spots that actually have collections that have climates that are quite similar to that of San Francisco in Northern California, in coastal Northern California. And you can see myself here back in November about to make out with the giraffe, which was a one of the high moments of my trip. And this was actually at a giraffe conservation center, and it was very nice to make a new friend during that time. But so to give you a little more background about why Kenya. So back in 2016, I was working for the Royal Botanic Garden in Jordan, and we were participating with the efforts of BGCI on the Global Trees campaign on creating propagation protocols for threatened tree species in Jordan. And there were several other gardens in countries along the African Rift Valley that were participating in the same project. And so for some of you who may not be familiar, Jordan lies at the very northern end of the African Rift Valley at the top of the Dead Sea. And so a lot of flora that you'd find in Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia actually made their way up through the African Rift Valley into the Dead Sea. region. And so we had a lot of crossover with tree species. So participating in that effort, which was really great, I was able to share a lot of our work with some of the other gardens down there. And Kirsty Shaw, who's head of the African region for BGCI, she invited me out to go down to Kenya and teach a workshop and help with a workshop on nursery management and plant propagation. And so back in 2016, I went down there for a couple of weeks, and it was absolutely amazing. Meeting so many different groups, seeing all the different challenges that different gardens had, different climates, different resources, all just really motivated to want to learn and see how they can, have the best impact, really have, pursue their mission as much as possible with the minimal resources they had. And so we had around 30 people show up to this workshop, and it was great. We had another colleague come from Thailand to talk about reforestation efforts. And we were all based at Brackenhurst Botanical Garden, which I'll show you a bit later, working on this. So Global Trees Campaign is a connection with Flora and Fauna International. And so far they've worked with 420 species specifically in 48 countries. And they're really making a great effort. And I look forward to working with them more in the future as well. So I'll also mention that part of coming to this trip was that BGCI requested I come out again because they wanted to do another training, and partly with nursery management and propagation again, but also with my new role now as curator, which I've been here at the garden for about 3 years, looking at how to do better collections management, so record keeping and labeling. And it was such a great way because they were focusing on montane species, and our cloud forest collections come from montane regions in the tropics, Kenya being one of those. And so it just seemed like such a perfect thing to see what species they had, what species are they having challenges with, how can I help them with some propagation and nursery management and record keeping for both their propagation efforts, but also once these plants are in the ground and they're growing them, how do you continue to monitor their success? How do you monitor where they are and so on? So it was a really great opportunity to work there and also get a feel for what kind of flora exists in those montane regions that are threatened. And so I had a really great start to my trip. I was set up in a tree house just outside Nairobi for about a week, and I just had to share this picture. It was just the most magical space. So it was a full-fledged tree house built out of wood. Really great space to sit at. I would do my work on this amazing balcony overlooking the forest. Part of Nairobi is off in the distance, hearing the mouse birds and the tree hyraxes at night. It was just a really great space to start off the trip, especially with the 10-hour jet lag. It was a really great place to sort of relax, but I had to start working very quickly. And soon, I think the day after I got there, I was already pulled into giving a presentation introducing our garden to the Kenya Horticulture Society. And so I got to talk a bit about my experiences in Jordan, how that led me to San Francisco, and really share with them the garden, and also how we would like to sort of connect with groups in Kenya moving forward. And after that, I had the great fortune also of visiting the IUCN site in Nairobi. And for those of you who may not be familiar, IUCN stands for International Union for Conservation of Nature. And so what the IUCN does is they document and assess the world's species and provide them ratings like threatened, endangered, vulnerable. And so it's a really good way. They work with groups all over the world in different countries to get a pulse on how the world's animals and plants are doing, and understanding what are those threats that are affecting them, and then also trying to find ways to connect researchers and other agencies to help protect them as well. Now the IUCN office in Nairobi is actually on an old estate of Peter Greensmith. And Peter Greensmith was an avid plant lover and horticulturist, really big from between the 1950s through the 1980s. And he had this beautiful estate outside of Nairobi. And since then, since his passing, it has turned into, and he has his garden there as well. And he was very big in introducing more horticultural practices to Kenya, introducing new species into the horticultural world. He actually introduced bougainvillea into Kenya. Of course, hopefully not too many of those plants have run off and become invasives, but it was really great to see one of these beautiful old estates, very old specimen trees and plantings. And it was just a really stunning space. And the person now who's managing the grounds and the plantings there and the nursery is this gentleman here. This is Josephat, and he was Peter Greensmith's protege. I think he started working with Peter Greensmith back when he was, I think he said 15 or something. And since then, he's sort of like the father of, he's like the second father of horticulture in Kenya now. And he just, the stories he would have and his understanding of how to grow plants, propagate plants in Kenya, in the Nairobi region is really, really incredibly deep. And he took the time to show me around with his crew and show us the nursery, talk about how they're trying to introduce more native species into their plantings, and also show how to grow native species in a more ornamental way so that the general public will want to get them into their homes and gardens. And so you can kind of see this more structured, sort of like an English border of sorts, but with definitely very tropical plants, some of which are definitely not native to Kenya, but many more are than you would typically see driving around Nairobi. You really don't see a good depth of native flora in just the normal landscape. And so it was really quite great to see this kind of mix of flashy tropical plants, some of which we can grow here, some of which we definitely couldn't, but it was really nice to see aloes, just like how we do them in nice deep borders and drifts, which is quite different from most of the landscape there. There was also a really great planting of cacti and succulents, many of which of those are native, and these large euphorbia cactus, and they're really excited to have like yuccas from the southwest of the United States there, and monster cycads. So it was just a really great space to see this more formal garden, which I had not seen before when I visited last time. And of course, you know, what do you do with your guests when you visit? You make them work. And Josephat, we rounded a corner and he had one of his staff pull out a tree, and he said, "Okay, Ryan, like it's your time to give, like, you know, we've shown you stuff and we've given to you. Now it's time for you to give back to us. And whenever we have special guests, they have to plant a tree." And it was really nice that you know, we had a chance to talk about how they plant trees there because they have very heavy, thick soil that tends to dry out, and they have limited access to irrigation. So planting things at the right time of year in the right way and amending the soil in a certain way and planting them higher. And it was really great to discuss this and also get to plant a tree at the IUCN site in Nairobi, which was so special. And you can see my big happy grin and dirty hands. And yeah, it was, even though I was jet lagged, it was so great to, you know, get in the dirt and participate. And even better, it's a native tree to Kenya. So Miletia duros is a nice, like, mid-sized tree in the Fabaceae family. Incredibly beautiful, fragrant flowers. It almost looks like a tree wisteria that doesn't climb. And so now I'm officially on record in their system of planting a tree, which was a really great start to begin my presentation and my lecture with the group as a whole from many other institutions in Kenya about record keeping or managing living collections. So the other fun thing about that, you know, us as gardeners, we always tend to complain about the pests we have. You know, oh, gophers are always my problem, or a raccoon dug this up. But, you know, it's a bit different over there. You know, you could have a warthog come through and dig up your new plants, or have to, you know, tiptoe around battling gargantuan chameleons in your lawn, like here. Or the big one is troops of baboons that come through and swing on your plants, or just rip them up and throw them at each other, which we saw at one point. So it's interesting to see, as much as we may complain about our very small critters here, They're a lot bigger there and much more dramatic problems that come with them as well. So it was really quite fun to see this warthogs and baboons in a beautifully cultivated and manicured garden. So the next place I went to a few days after that was a bit higher in elevation, and this was Brackenhurst Botanic Garden. And this was, this is a site that I got to teach my first workshop at back in 2016, and it was so nice to be back again and really see a lot of the plants grow bigger. And so Brackenhurst started off as just a massive tea plantation, so completely denuded of any native vegetation. And over time, through the efforts of Mark Nicholson, who's the gentleman on the left, over the past 20 years, he has been planting native Afromontane species throughout the grounds of Brackenhurst, which is now a sort of a convention center and a retreat and hotel. So he's been working with them to change out the exotic plantings and input native planting. And the gentleman to the right is Herbert Migiro, who has been with Brackenhurst for about 4 years now as well. I think he started on full time right after I left, but I met him when I was there as well. And both are avid plant nuts, very, very great, very knowledgeable. And so we kind of did a three-pronged approach to our workshop. And so I talked about collections management and the basics of record keeping and how you can do things with less. And then Mark, Herbert and I walked around and we looked at different examples of what was working, what wasn't working on the Brackenhurst site. Also looking at how to do planting, how to record plantings when you do that. So it was a really great opportunity. We had a whole mix of people some were from the IUCN garden, others were from other conservation groups or private landowners who want to convert and actually create more forest on their private land. So it was a really great opportunity. We brought families and did a tree planting, of course. So I didn't have to plant this time, but it was a really, really exciting opportunity and great to be back. And it was also nice to walk through their forest, which was planted about 20 years ago around the perimeter of Brackenhurst, and see some of these really beautiful plant species that they have there, which are Afromontane, high elevation, cloud forest species. And so some fun ones, Acanthus eminens, which is a beautiful dark purple acanthus. And this one can actually get around 10 feet tall and make almost like bamboo thickets. And the plant in the middle, which I'm pretty sure most of us Bay Area plant nerds are quite familiar with, is Impatiens Sodenii. And this one is native there and pops up all over the place, and they're big and lush and robust. And it's kind of fun to see a common plant, what we view as a common garden plant, in its native habitat. And this really beautiful yellow Buddleia species, which did not have a tag on it. But I definitely need to ask them to see what that species in particular. Other beautiful trees on the site, Ficus vasta, and a type of fig, which is actually native from the Jordan Valley all the way down through East Africa. And Hagenia abyssinica, this tree on the right, which was actually only about maybe 15 feet tall when I visited, and has grown so much. I remember that tree specifically. And later in my talk, I'll show you what those look like in the wild. And this is a really cool species that's in the Rosaceae family, and it's monotypic and only occurs in high elevations in East Africa. So a little fun thing about my time in Kenya was that it was supposed to be the dry season, and it wasn't. So Kenya has what they call a bimodal rainfall or rain system. So they have 2 rainy seasons and 2 dry seasons. And the 2 rainy seasons happen so the rainy seasons are warm and the dry seasons are cool. And typically end of November, December, it is pretty dry. And so what we're looking at this picture here is a view looking over the African Rift Valley. And it was just funny because I was told it was gonna be bone dry and brown, and it was so lush and green, which was really quite interesting. But also during that time, it was just raining nonstop, and floods were happening all over the country. Landslides were occurring everywhere, and it was a big concern because what they're saying is that the rainy seasons are shorter, or they're not going on the same routines as they once were. They weren't as reliable, and they're either very heavy or very little. And so it's really becoming, climate change is becoming a big problem there, because it's affecting affecting land usage. It's creating, especially with a lot of the deforestation there, areas don't have proper vegetation cover to handle the intense rainfalls out of season, and so landslides are happening all over the place. And this view from the African Rift Valley was on to my next sort of adventure, which was to the Guatemayu Forest, which is at the base of the Aberdare Mountains, which is one of the big watersheds for Nairobi, for the Nairobi region. And this is a really beautiful sort of mixed forest between the sort of more lowland tropical and more like mid-montane lowland tropical forest, and the more cloud forest, montane forest. And this is a really cool mixing ground, but it's a forest that has really suffered a lot of damage due to clear cutting and poor land usage and wood poaching. And it used to support a very large population of elephants, which are now gone. And many of the areas surrounding, especially on the drive up to that forest, look like this. And this is a sterile forest, a sterile timber plantation of Cupressus lusitanica. So what you see a lot happening around is that areas of natural forests are cut down, all the prized timber is removed and sold for high prices, and then it's usually grazed and then planted with non-native conifers, some of which being our Monterey pine, Monterey cypress, are very common invasives and plantation trees at the high elevations, along with Cupressus lusitanica, and these just become sterile forests. You walk inside, they're dark, there's no vegetation underneath, no diversity, and no birds. It's just a really sad space, but it's really nice when you actually do get into an actual forest, and just the diversity and the complexity of the flora there was absolutely stunning. This was a very treacherous hike, as it was very steep and incredibly muddy due to the high rainfall that kept pummeling us at various moments. Normally this would be a very easy hike, but it's still great to get in there. Some beautiful species I got to see while we're in there, trying to keep my camera dry. Were some different impatient species. This beautiful Tabor montana stapfiana. Now this is in the Rubiaceae, which is the same family as gardenias. So this is a beautiful sort of maybe 20, 30 foot tall tree that has these beautiful gardenia, very strongly scented gardenias, fragrant flowers. This was just a flower that fell on the ground, and I could smell it on the ground. It was just insane how perfumed the air was with this. And a species many of you may be familiar with, Podocarpus latifolius, a native podocarp native to South Africa, up the East African coast. And this one, it was actually I was quite excited. It was my first time to see a Podocarpus in the wild. But the sad thing was that there were very few large specimens, because the large trees get poached. By the time they get a trunk like this, they're cut down and sold. So it's really only very few seedlings that pop up. And it just shows how much wood poaching is happening, and how, even though this forest is still diverse and beautiful, it's still not what it should be. And there's still a lot of threats happening in those areas, in these beautiful habitats. But one of the definite highlights of this hike was seeing this beautiful patch of Cyathea humilis. And this is a high elevation tree fern native to montane regions in Eastern Africa, from Ethiopia down into Tanzania, and so cool. We were hoping to go further, actually across this creek with the raging waterfall behind it, because it should actually be just a trickling creek at that time of year. We were unable to, obviously, but just seeing these beautiful tree ferns was stunning. They're actually a very spiny tree fern as well. So they're pretty nasty, nice hooked spines up and down the fronds and the trunks. So definitely not one you want to get too near, but I do love a plant with some attitude to it. After that, I was able to head off to African forest. And African Forest is an organization based down in the African Rift Valley. So we went from Gatumayo, above the African Rift Valley, then down into the Rift Valley, and you can this is kind of a view from the house at the African Forest site, overlooking the Soisambu Preserve. That's a salt lake out in the distance, which had flamingos on it at the time, which was really quite stunning. And African Forest is an effort that was first started by Kenya Mutiso and his late wife, Helen. And Kenya, his name is Kenya, is just a fantastic individual. Back in 2006, he and his wife were alarmed by the state of how much deforestation was happening in Kenya, and they really want to make an effort to educate the public and really get native trees in the ground and really find ways to improve the livelihoods of people who do rely on the forest to survive. And so they set up this nursery, and it's around, it's about a 10-acre site, no, 15-acre site. And they set up this agroforestry initiative. And so over these past several years, they have set up a seed center. They do training with how to develop non-timber products like honey keeping and so on. Also showing how to grow a native forest and harvest from it while not, completely clear cutting it at all times. So it's a really great way. They're doing some fantastic work across the country. And in the last couple of years, they've really started to expand more and work with governmental organizations like the Kenya Forestry Service and go out and start collecting seed. They have permits now to go out and collect seeds of native species to grow in their nurseries, to provide to landowners to get more native trees out and about throughout Kenya. And they're working with montane species and also with some of the coastal species as well. So it's a fantastic initiative, and I was able to work with them when I went 4 years ago. And so I was lucky enough to stay with at the African Forest site for about a good week and a half. And so working with their team and helping set up, working in their nursery, helping with some propagation protocols, seeing how we could help make their operations more efficient, increase their propagation success rates. And also we were brainstorming on how to become better partners with each other, because the thing that they're lacking is capacity building, more resources to do trainings to their staff and to their constituents. And it was a really great chance for us to sit and brainstorm and talk about these things, looking at how to do better collections, how to document those as well, how to, they have a lot of issues where they want to grow more cuttings, but then they have a poor success rate with cuttings when they collect them from the wild. And it was a really great chance to brainstorm and see how we could partner with each other from across the world. And the benefit that we could work, the garden could provide them with capacity training and assistance with stuff like that. And then they could work with us and provide us with some seed that we can serve as an ex situ conservation site. So in the event some of these very rare species get cut down there because of a development or because they're overgrazed, there's a resource for those plants outside of the country that can eventually go back in case anything disastrous happens. And also just being on a beautiful site like that, and it being so wet and having so much rain and green, I can't resist and start tromp through the bush around there and look at these amazing different plants. A couple of these might look familiar. So various aloe species were blooming all over the place. Rotheca miracoides, which used to be Clerodendron ugandense, has now been changed names. So this is actually a common plant you would see, you can buy at Home Depot sometimes even. And interesting to see it in this sort of like upland arid savanna, growing in shrubs like this. And it was really fun to walk around because I couldn't do it by myself. I actually had a pack of 4 Rottweilers with me, guarding me as I walked around because they are leopards and Cape buffalo that often crash through the site. So having to go in the middle of the day and have a pack of bodyguards with me was a bit daunting, but a bit exciting at the same time. Excuse me 1 minute. So, apologies. Yes. All right, thank you. All right. Apologies about that. We had Park Patrol coming through to check to see if my truck was mine. So yeah, it was a really great opportunity to see these plants in a very precarious environment. And then after that, I really got to go on an amazing adventure up to the Aberdare Mountains. And this is a very high elevation region and true cloud forest up and kind of the base of the water, the really kind of main mountain that provides most of the water for Kenya. And it's just so fun. Simon, one of the staff at African Forest, we drove up together, rented a 4x4, going through these thick bamboo forests. You can see, I didn't realize there was a bamboo native to Africa. And so this is Arundinaria alpinum, which is a really cool, thick growing bamboo, but we had to watch out because you don't know what's hiding inside of it. The Aberdare Mountains have elephants and Cape buffalo, and often as we were driving through, antelope were crashing out of the bushes and the shrubs. And as you get higher, we found another familiar species. For those of you who've seen our entrance garden, Impatiens tinctoria, growing good 4 or 5 feet tall in a big ditch. It was really cool to see that in habitat. And also see some amazing tree arborescent hypericum. So this is Hypericum revolutum, which is a really beautiful species. And there are actually several arborescent hypericums native to many of the high elevations in East Africa, from Ethiopia down to Tanzania and Malawi. And as you get past the sort of bamboo layer, you start getting into actual forest. And this is a forest of Haginia, Abyssinica, which I showed you earlier. And you can see it was misty, but it was misty at moments, but most of the time it was just dumping down rain. And here's a close-up of the Haginia, which is actually like I said, monotypic species in Rosaceae with beautiful peely, almost manzanita type bark and leaves that look like a melianthus. Under those, you'd see forests of Lobelia bambuseti, which is another endemic to Kenya. They're not flowering now, but these sort of branching lobelias, which are quite cool. And then you get past the tree line, and you can see this road is just flooding with water. And we got stuck a few times, which was always exciting when you're in the middle of nowhere and no cell reception. You get up into the sort of the heath layer, which this is Erica arborea. So the tree heather, which is native from in areas of the Mediterranean Sea into the Carpathian Mountains and down the African Rift Valley at very high elevations. And one of my favorite parts is seeing the little gems that would show up on the edges of the heath forests. To my right is Delphinium to my left is Delphinium macrocentrum. That plant I saw on the side of the road, it was dumping down rain. I see this flash of turquoise and I had to jump out so we can get a herbarium sample of it. Absolutely insanely beautiful Delphinium with that turquoise and with that green and blue flower. Some beautiful Vernonias, Gladiolus delenii. So not all gladiolus are from South Africa. They do occur at high elevations in the tropics, which are quite beautiful. And some other great species, Parachaetus and Rheota jugas that were quite large. And other familiar plants like Teucriums and Plectranthus and Alchemillus. So it was interesting to see the mix of common garden plants, whether they're temperate or tropical, mixing in this beautiful, cool zone. And kind of as you get past this sort of heath layer, you start getting into the actual moors. And these sort of like wet, swampy, boggy marshlands and sort of grassy areas. And you can see it was just dumping down rain up there. So it was really hard to get a good shot. But Simon here was very excited to find some elephant dung on the road because apparently elephant dung is a very highly prized when it's dried as a medicinal, has medicinal qualities. And so it's always exciting. So we had to use one of our herbarium bags to nab some of that for him. And to the right, you can see off in the distance are some Cape buffalo hanging out in a very cold, boggy pond over there. So it was interesting to see. It was nice to see the animals from a distance. It definitely was not. I definitely didn't want to see them too up close, especially when we weren't with a ranger. And you don't want to be out there by yourself too close to some of these very large animals, as you can imagine. And one of my favorite exciting plants to run into were one of the large lobelias. The high elevations of Eastern Africa are famous for these large arborescent lobelias. And this one's Lobelia aberdarica, which you can imagine is endemic to the Aberdare mountain range. And of course, I had to take a nice stupid picture of myself with it, nice and cheesy, up close to show for size. And just the up close of these beautiful kind of dark blue, these nice beautiful blue flowers was just a really great sight to see up there. So I was definitely quite happy. And so on our way back to African forest, which is about a 4 or 5 hour drive, looking over this hill of Juniperus procera and Olea europa, so had this very Mediterranean sort of feel to it, with some acacias and aloes through. Our car broke down, and you can see some steam or smoke coming up from the engine there. So we had about 2 or 3 more hours left to get back home, and it ended up being 7 hours, as we were stuck on the side of the road, trying to figure out a way to get the car someplace safe, and then also figure out how to get home. So we can get back to about 1 in the morning, which was quite exciting and quite the adventure, as you can imagine. But it's all part of the game. And of course, when you're broken down on the side of the road, why not botanize a bit and look at some really cool aloes blooming. I don't know which species these were, but it was a nice positive thing while getting stuck in the middle of nowhere. And so after getting back to the African forest site and getting a chance to unwind a bit and relax, and really start to think about how we can make this partnership a reality, how we can make a bigger role in plant conservation, how we can partner with African forests and really be much more of a global, and use that as a possible template to work with other organizations. It really kind of shows the efforts, how important the efforts are that Botanic Gardens play in terms of global plant conservation. And so right now we are in the process of fundraising for a new nursery, and we're about $1 million away from our $6.7 million matching gift, which is provided by our board chair, Del Maxwell, and her husband, Patrick Hanrahan, which is incredibly generous. And, all of the, right now we can work on creating these partnerships, but, they can't become reality without a nursery site to actually grow all these species we want to grow, bring in and protect from around the world. So we have to have a space to grow them and produce them safely and cleanly, and document everything as well. So it's lots going on, really exciting, and a lot to look forward to this next year. So I don't want to go over on time, but here's just a quick picture of a quick mock-up of what our new nursery site will look like. And hopefully at some point there will be some really great wild collected, provenance known, data recorded, legally and ethically sourced Afromontane species from Kenya entering our lovely nursery site at some point in the next few years. So with that, I will bring Jessa back on and see if any of you have questions for me.
Thanks, Ryan. That was fascinating and beautiful. And I always love adventures that are wrought with large wildlife and lots of rain. So it sounds like it was a truly authentic adventure. So we do have a question. One of our attendees tonight was looking at the map that you shared earlier and had a question about why Western Australia was not on the map of areas from which we would be getting plants for San Francisco Botanical Garden, and was wondering why.
That is actually a great question, and thank you for catching a mistake of mine. So we've had several iterations of that map that we've been creating, isolating these different regions of the world. And Western Australia, the coastal southern portion of Western Australia, most definitely should be on that map. And thank you for catching that I did not put the most up-to-date map in my presentation. So, and that's a really great way of talking about a partnership, because most of UC Santa Cruz Arboretum's fantastic Australian collection really is from Western Australia. And something we want to do is back up collections with other institutions. And so, yes, we we do plan to have a Western Australian collection, and good eye for catching that.
Yeah, gold star for that one.
Yeah.
All right, another question is, you mentioned kind of a developing Afromontane collection. Is there a space in mind in the garden for that, and how will it complement the existing collections?
Oh, yeah, no, we have a designated area to develop in the future. So this would be the area, the site of behind the Redwood Grove, up on the hill. So between the Redwood Grove and the Children's Garden, sort of where what we call the upper nursery at the moment is, but that whole sort of arc expanding from the succulent garden behind the Redwood Grove to between the Children's Garden. So it's a really great spot that shows a broad range of growing conditions. So we have shaded moist areas, we'd have exposed moist areas, sort of like the moors. And then we'd also have an area that's sunnier and drier, so it'd show more of the high elevation leeward side, so the sort of the high dry side of these montane regions. So it'll take some time, but that's the designated area. And to answer the second part of that question, that would also, it ties in because we want to grow cloud forest flora from every part of the world where we can. And so currently we have cloud forest floras from Central America, South America, Asia, parts of Australia, but we don't have Africa. And so we need to have that to complete the picture.
Excellent. Another viewer is wondering about the water requirements of Eastern African montane species. How much supplemental water would be necessary to help those species thrive?
Yeah, it's a great question. So that would depend on the species. So what we're looking at is based on elevation. So with every mountain, you have the dry side and the wet side. And so the way, like I mentioned, we would actually organize the species based on their growing conditions. So the nice thing about being at the back end of the Redwood Grove, not in the Redwood Grove, is that it's very shaded and cool and holds a lot of moisture. So we would put our shade-loving, moisture-loving species in those areas, where ones that are more exposed, we would actually have the drier-loving species up there. So everything in the gardens can require extra irrigation. We are sitting on a sand dune. Water doesn't retain well through that, goes right through, but we also have a cool climate. And yeah, we do actively irrigate our garden, but we're focused on making sure we put dry things that like dry things with dry things, and wet things with wet things. So.
Great. There's a question about local partnerships and just a general interest about learning more about our collections policy, but separately, what do we currently do at SFBG in coordination with other more local botanic gardens like UCB, Davis, Santa Cruz, Tilden?
Yeah, so we are working on creating more and more partnerships, and actually we've always had casual partnerships. I would say casual, but botanic gardens are not in competition with each other. We have great relationships with each other and exchange material all the time, but one of our goals now looking forward is actually formalizing these partnerships. And so we have a great relationship with UC Berkeley Botanical Garden in exchanging material. We're looking at creating a sort of cloud forest consortium as a multi-site collection. So, anytime any garden wants to come and take cuttings from us because they need to have them in their collection, we oblige happily. So we're looking at finding more institutions, more research institutions that we can help each other out and see how we can use their use their expertise, our site, vice versa, and so on.
Great. You mentioned as part of your presentation talking about the collection management processes and record keeping that you were doing there. And one of our guests was interested in our record keeping systems. How do we do it? And could you describe kind of the contents of what a typical record might look like for a botanical garden species?
Sure. Well, first I would say I have a fantastic team that I work with. I have a plant records manager and a GIS mapping manager. And they are great because they really are in charge of getting every every piece of information as possible, whether it's physical or virtual in our database. We do have a database called IRIS-BG, and we record as much information as possible about the plant. So every plant gets an accession number or a catalog number, and we record who gave it to us, when, where they got it from, when it was planted, when it dies, when any sort of maintenance is done on it, when we can get that information. If some event happens, we want to know about it. So what we start building is a almost like a yearbook, a living record of our living collection, because the more we know about our plants and what's current about them, the more we can actually say there's more depth and actual value to our collection. And also, pretty soon we'll be getting our database parts of our database accessible online on our website, so you can actually start to look up accession numbers that you find in the garden and see the information about that plant on our website. So hopefully in about a month or so, that will be up and running.
One question here about wondering about the ongoing coordination with maybe some of these African organizations, partners, to realize the new nursery and collaborate into the future on exchanges like you were describing with seeds and capacity building trainings and things like that. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of the future of some of these collaborations as realized by having a new nursery?
Definitely, yeah. So, you know, like I mentioned, some of these organizations, let's say in Kenya, you know, they have lots of motivation and they're trying to get a lot of this work done, but it's hard when, you know, they don't know how to get everything done in the most efficient way possible. And so what we can do is provide services like capacity building to help them achieve their mission and get the best impact possible. And in exchange, we get a few seed back. And so it's a thing where we're trying to help each other out. They can help send us seed so that we can actually preserve that rare species in our collection in case something happens there. And then we get the chance to work with them to make sure they can try and preserve that species in their country at the same time. So it's a nice way to kind of like creating insurance policies of sort and really help expose all of us to what's going on in the world and how we can really make a great impact.
When we do acquire new species, so for example, from one of these partner organizations, is part of the consideration when they're planted out in our garden, whether or not there's, aside from all the other requirements that that plant might have, if there's a pollinator relationship that is going to be effective for that species?
That's possible. You know, we never know how something's going to react until it's here. And, you know, something we take into account a lot is watching these plants as they grow and mature. You know, there are plants in our collection that may never set seed because we don't have the proper pollinator here. And that's fine because we are serving as a repository for genetic diversity. And, you know, that plant could be, and also we wouldn't want to necessarily, depending on what the species is, we want to preserve that genetics because we know it's wild collected. So there are ways of through clonal propagation that we'd actually rather preserve it once it's here and send that back if that ever needed to happen. But yeah, we never. It's in terms of a pollinator. Yeah, if we don't have it, and may not set seed, and so it's just kind of a reality. But at least that plant exists and that genome is preserved here with us.
Great. If you, so of your wish list species from your visit, made your top 10 list of what you saw that you would really love to see planted out in SFBG, what would be your number one?
Oh, okay. I'm gonna give two. I'm gonna break the rule. One of them is Erythrina abyssinica, so coral tree native to high elevations. Stunning, probably the prettiest coral tree you'll see around. Very beautiful. And the other one is Acacia abyssinica, which is a high elevation acacia that has that perfect, beautiful, like high, flat top. When you think Africa, you think like that kind of acacia was just tabletop, flat-topped acacias. It's absolutely stunning and beautiful. I couldn't get a good picture of one because it was pouring rain the entire time, but it's a truly beautiful species, and I highly recommend you look it up.
Great. Kind of a last partnership question, which is going a little bit deeper, is in addition to providing plants for us and us providing info on collection methods with a prospective international partner, do you anticipate other ways that the collaboration could unfold beyond kind of those couple of examples?
Actually, repeat the question one more time. I didn't quite catch that.
Sorry, I'll read it more directly.
Yeah.
In addition to providing plants for us, and we providing info on collection methods to them, they be doing for us?
Sorry, you cut out.
I'll try to keep it a little bit shorter.
Sure.
What other benefits to a botanical garden is an international partnership, conservation partnership, beyond potentially just getting some seeds here and there or collection methods?
Oh, right, there we go. So yeah, besides the great impact for conservation of that species as a whole, it's a great way to show our visitors these plants up close and personal, to create those relationships with that species, to understand what's happening to biodiversity across the world and how it's being impacted. And so, we need those really beautiful species with the great stories behind them to get people interested and understand why it's so important to preserve plants. And I think that's one of the greatest impacts that can be made. And hopefully those people want to contribute toward the effort as well, once they fall in love with plants and with a species in a certain part of the world.
I think that's a beautiful way to end our presentation tonight. Thank you so much for sharing everything that you did about this particular visit. And of course, I think we all have our eyes full of beautiful imagery, and I, for one, am really excited about the development of these future collections and seeing some of these things in person myself, with maybe not such an adventure in the process. So thank you very much, Ryan. We are going to, we didn't get to all the questions. If we didn't get to your question, we will have the opportunity to contact you outside of this session. And thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.